Any comments? Any objections? So moved.
9B, Finance Committee, Ms. Dastug.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On behalf of the Finance Committee, I move approval of items 1 through 42, noting that item number 41 is a notice of intent.
I have a motion. A second. Second by Mr. Lee.
Mr. Chair, I'd like
Mrs.
to be
Johnson.
recorded on 29 and 30 as voting against them.
29 and 30.
All right, record Mrs. Johnson as voting against 29 and 30.
A point of order. Oh, I see. Voting against the motion today.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions?
Got it.
Any objections? So moved.
9C, High School Redesign Committee, Mr. Bayard.
Yes, on behalf of the members of the High School Redesign Committee, I would like to move on items 1 through 8 in Globo, noticing that 6 and 7 are notices of intent.
Second. All right, motion by Mr. Bayard, seconded by Mr. Bennett. Any objections?
Mr. President,
Pardon me?
Mr. President, I don't have an objection to this motion, but I'm looking back at the Finance Committee report in 29 and 30. I'd like to be recorded as voting against.
We will do that. All right. Any objections to the approval of the Legal Due Process Committee?
High School Redesign.
Excuse me, High School Redesign. And so moved.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to point out that we did add to those minutes under number 8, Mr. Mike Labatt's Monthly Moments with Mike, the newsletter that he initiated and has put out. And I had worked with staff. I thought it ought to be in the minutes, and I'd like to be sure there's a copy of it attached to our final minutes. It's a very innovative thing that he's thought of and done as our student leader, and I wanted to be sure that it is permanently recorded.
Thank you, Mrs. Bouquet. And I think it is so recorded.
9D, Legal Due Process Committee, Mr. Lee.
Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the Legal Due Process Committee, I move approval of items 1 and 2.
All right, we have a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Johnson. Any objections? Motion approved.
No one knows two.
Already in finance.
Okay. That's in finance. Excuse me. Back on the Finance Committee, items 29 and 30, Mr. Bayard wishes to be recorded as no vote on both of them.
9E, Legislative Committee, Ms. Givens.
Thank you. Mr. President, I move that we adopt items 1 through 5 as reported in the minutes.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any objections? Motion approved.
9F, Quality Leaders Educators Committee, Ms. Bouquet.
Good morning. The Quality Leaders Educators Committee met on Tuesday, September 14th, and I move approval of items 1 through 3 and 5 through 14, noting notices of intent for numbers 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14.
Second.
All right, I have a motion by Ms. Bouquet, seconded by Mr. Lee.
I'd like to then read item number 4 and note that we had adopted this.
Ms. Bouquet, could we get a vote, please, on everything but 4? Any objections to that? So moved. Okay, please.
All right, item number 4 noted that the Quality Leaders Educators Committee recommends that the board approve the following appointees to the Education Evaluation Advisory Committee. We now have a name for the person appointed for the slot at the bottom of your page, Louisiana School Boards Association nominee. And I'm sorry, I don't have it here with me. But we do have a person, and I wanted it recorded in the minutes, and you have a copy. Or Shan has a copy, okay?
Okay. So what we're doing is you have it now.
Name. I see this.
Elizabeth.
I see this. It doesn't have the person's name. Do we have to have it?
On there at the bottom.
Oh, I see it. All right, I'm sorry. Gaynell C. Young has been appointed by the School Boards Association, and her name should be added to the list.
Thank you, Ms. Bouquet. Do you have a motion to that? To add that?
I'll second.
All right, and seconded by Mr. Lee. So a motion to add this lady to this committee. Any objections? So moved.
And just as a bit of information, Ms. Shaw has called a meeting of the group for next Friday. Is that correct? The 20, right. So we that group will have its first meeting then. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bouquet.
Do we have, Ms. Bouquet, I'm sorry, do we have a time and a place?
Yeah, I think
Yes.
it's
Oh,
for
you sent it.
9 o'clock, and it'll be here in the building.
It's in the building in room.
Rapides Room here at 9 o'clock next Friday, and an
That's
agenda
on the
will...
third floor?
Third floor, yes, that's correct. On the south end of the building, third floor. And we'll probably send out an agenda not later than tomorrow.
Mr. Chairman, I would
Ms.
appreciate if all board members were notified, given notice, so that if we had the option to attend as an attendee.
Yes. Ms. Shaw, will you be sure that that is sent out to everyone? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, item 9G, Recovery School District Committee, Mr. Romer.
Yes, on behalf of the Recovery School District Committee, I'd like to move approval of items 1 through 38, noting item 9 is an NOI, and I need an item, Mr. Garvey's asked for an item to be, it doesn't have an item number, it's after number 29, he's asked to be recognized. So I guess we should hear on item 29 what Mr. Garvey does before we take action.
Mr. President, and I have some corrections to the minutes, please, in terms of the list of people who spoke at the public comment.
Mr. Romer, 38 is a notice of intent.
Oh, and 38 is notice of intent, I'm sorry. So item 9 and item 38 are NOI.
Mr. Garvey.
Yes, sir. Mr. Guys, I'd like to move for approval of the contracts with the new teachers project, which are listed on page 13 between items 29 and 30. A $400,000 contract is the first one, and the second contract is $1 million.
Mr. Garvey, could you hold that?
Yes, sir.
Most till we go, Mr. Ron, would you go ahead and make a motion on your, and then we'll come on your 1 through 38 with a notice, and then we'll come back to that one.
We can, Mr. President. Only difficulty I have is that those items that he mentioned aren't numbered, so I'm not exactly certain how to deal with them. Is it okay?
Okay, I understand. Go ahead, Mr. Garvey.
Yes, sir. I made a motion.
You made a motion.
To
I'll
approve
second.
those contracts.
All right, we have a
Second
motion
motion.
and a second to approve the contract. That's the new teachers project
It is, the new teacher project is involved in these contracts.
in those numbers. All right.
Don't put numbers.
I have a motion and a second to approve these contracts. Do I have an objection?
Yes.
I'm not in favor of those contracts.
So let's just have a roll call vote on this.
We are voting, Mr. Chairman, on those two contracts only.
That-
And if I remember correctly, Ms. Fosberg, the reason there are no numbers is you don't number things that are not
That's correct.
recommended.
That's right.
So it is, I don't know how you designate it, other
Yeah,
than
this will
to say-
become motion 29A.
All right. Mr. Bedford.
If it passes.
Am I correct that these dollars are grant dollars and not department budget dollars?
The second portion, the $1 million contract, is a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The first contract is from MFP dollars.
And, Mr. Chairman,
Lee.
could I get a little better explanation
Could
as
I
to
have
these
discussion?
what these two contracts are for?
Why are they? Is this
We did
different
that.
money from the
Mr.
other
Chairman,
money?
Mr. Lee has asked for an explanation of what these two contracts are.
somebody
for.
from the staff, or
Someone from-
whoever's recommending them.
Good morning, Kevin Gutierrez, Deputy Superintendent with Recovery School District. The first contract for TNTP, the $400,000 contract, is for recruitment as well as our MSI activities in terms of not only supporting the recruitment but also supporting the placement of individuals, the ongoing evaluation of individuals throughout the school year. The second contract is a development of a very robust process in which we support and evaluate individuals throughout every school across the RSD. It's also been used as a precursor to a statewide effort to do the same sort of effort, to assist districts in that effort.
If I could add to that. So we have made a decision to outsource the development, evaluation, and training of our teachers in the school system, and we use TNTP as an outsourced effort to do that. So that's the $400,000 contract. The other one is a $1 million grant that we received from the Gates Foundation to get us set up as a trailblazer district for the work that's to come on the strategies that we had forth in the Race to the Top application. And the Recovery School District was honored by the Gates Foundation to be given a grant to develop a stronger evaluation system for teachers that we would pilot in the Recovery School District and would be used to be looked at by other districts to see if it would be valuable for their use. So I want to be clear that the Recovery School District is spending its own money on a contract to outsource this rather than hire people to do this work inside the Recovery School District. That's the $400,000, and the other one is a $1 million grant from the Gates Foundation.
Mr. Lee, you had further question.
But now, am I understanding that with the $400,000 that's being outsourced, that new teacher project would do the observing and evaluating of teachers and not the principal or not people inside the organization?
They actually support and help train our staff to do that work.
To train
our principals
staff,
do provide the
meaning
evaluation.
Our principals, our supervisors. But the principals do the evaluation.
Correct.
So this would be essentially training the principals to do the evaluation.
It's also the development of the instructional tool, the framework, the professional development in terms of training not only the principals but our massive teachers and every teacher in our, all of the teachers in our buildings around the model.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Bayard.
Yes, you know, I'm kind of wondering. I know I've heard about other districts possibly being able to utilize this, but I'd like to go in a different direction. I think what we have in this state is a few school districts for sure who are on the borderline of other states and who perform poorly and whose certification numbers aren't quite where they need to be. And as a result, I think what we're missing the boat on in some of these areas is that we should be able to provide an incentive for teachers to go there. Now, if I was making a unilateral decision, what I would do is take as much money as I could. I would get one of my retired principals who's in a service district who is very professional, articulate, and has good salesmanship skills, good leadership skills. And I would ask that person to go to a recruiting fair at a university and offer signing bonuses at neighboring schools, especially outside of the state, to come teach there. And that way, we could fill the void in other areas of the state. Instead of concentrating, it seems like all of these grants and all of this money is going straight to RSD. None of the other school districts have the luxury. They could, but they also could maybe better spend it in the mode that I just talked about. So I just think if we're going to start pumping money into teacher recruitment, it doesn't need to go into an organization. It needs to go into the hands of young potential teachers who've chosen their profession as a career, who may stay in a location for 3, 4, 5 years. Instead of being recruited into RSD and leaving in 2, 3, or 4 years, and we've got nothing. I just think We need to be across the board in education decisions, and we have not been when it comes to RSD. And it's time that we have total equity, total stability, total identical treatment of every public institution that teaches children in Louisiana.
Mr. Geis.
Thank you, Mr. Bayard.
Mr. Geis.
Mrs. Givens and then Mrs. Johnson.
I have a couple of corrections to the listing of public commentors. The first one is Reverend Willie Callahan. It should be Reverend Willie Calhoun.
You might want to wait.
Let's wait on that one till
Well,
we.
I said I had corrections. I mean, you know,
All right.
I'm just being recognized.
Let's deal with this item. We'll get back to you. Mrs. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I went on record in the finance portion of this meeting to be against 2 of the contracts. And the reason why I did is real simple, in my opinion. For the new teacher project, which I am absolutely not against, there's $900,000 plus $1 million. So that's $1,900,000 between the Department of Education and the RSD. Now let me be clear, to me, they're one and the same. So maybe someone else is deciding that they're different, but to me, they're one and the same. And $968,468 for the Teach for America project. And as I was told on yesterday, it is to recruit teachers. And I'm real concerned about recruiting teachers, and maybe the superintendents in this audience can help me when you all aren't hiring teachers. So, and the fact that what I have been told is that, and everybody knows it, the Katie-Haycock data says if you get an effective teacher for 3 years, children improve. And on yesterday I was told they stay about 2. So I have some real issues with what we're doing here in terms of the dollars. And that's why I'm going on record as being opposed to it.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Pastor.
I'll just be very brief. The money that we're spending on the new teacher project, which is the subject of this, is to help us improve the way that we hire, recruit, maintain, evaluate, encourage the retention of teachers. Generally speaking, in this state, we don't do as well as we could. We do have some examples where we do well, but we could do better. This is an opportunity to try something new and different. New and different. Let's try something new and different so we can improve what we have. And the effects of the new teacher project are widely recognized. In fact, yesterday we heard a presentation by Dr. Noel and by Dr. Gene Burns, or perhaps it was the day before, where the new teacher project has done a very, very good job of bringing on teachers who perform at levels better than veteran teachers. And it's the same people that do that we want to come in and help us with recruiting. Now, as for Teach for America and having them come in, they make a commitment for 2 years. But many of them stay where they feel like they have an opportunity to do better. And as for the Teach for America project that you voted against, Ms. Johnson, we have 50 Teach for America candidates that are now in the Mississippi Delta. I have been pushing Teach for America to get teachers into the Mississippi Delta, and they are now there. In fact, they volunteered for New Orleans, but they were asked by Teach for America to go to the Delta, and 50 volunteered. I was at Tallulah High School about 2 weeks ago and saw 16 Teach for America teachers in that school. Representative Bubba Cheney told me you would never get those teachers to go to that kind of community because there's no place to live and it's not a pleasant place to reside. And yet, 16 teachers are there. So I think what we need to do is we need to look at new ways of approaching it. And I'll just say one final thing, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to go on. But if any other district in the state of Louisiana wants to get this money from the Gates Foundation, I will personally make the request on their behalf. Because if they want to do this kind of work, they can get money from the Gates Foundation. So it's a question of whether you want to do this work. If you don't want to do this work, don't raise your hand. But if you want to do this work, I personally will go get money from the Gates Foundation to help you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, I think we have discussed this. We need a roll call vote on this, please.
Mr. Bayard?
I'm no on 29B and C.
Mr. Bayard votes no. Mr. Bennett?
Yes.
Mr. Bennett votes yes. Ms. Bradford?
Yes.
Ms. Bradford votes yes. Ms. Buquet?
Yes.
Ms. Buquet votes yes. Ms. Dastug?
Yes.
Ms. Dastug votes yes. Mr. Garvey?
Yes.
Mr. Garvey votes yes. Ms. Givens?
I'm voting yes, except for the amended items under number 29.
Ms. Givens votes yes. Ms. Johnson?
No. Point of order real quick. Are we voting just on these two contracts?
Just on those
Just
two.
on these two contracts.
Ms. Givens, you might
Ms.
want
Givens voted no.
Just on these two contracts.
I'm sorry.
That's
Thank you.
okay.
Ms. Givens votes no. Ms. Johnson?
No.
Ms. Johnson votes no. Mr. Lee?
Yes.
Mr. Lee votes yes. Mr. Romer?
Yes.
Mr. Romer votes yes. Mr. Geis, do you care to vote?
I do. I want to be voted and shown as no.
Mr. Geis votes no.
So I now move for approval of items 1 through 38. Although I think Ms. Givens
One
had an
second.
amendment she wanted to do.
1 second. The motion passed by a vote of
7-4.
7-4. All right. Now, Mr. Romer.
Actually, I'm going to defer. Ms. Givens had some corrections she
you
wanted
had
to
some
make.
corrections to make now. Mrs. Givens on.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Romer. The first one is Reverend Willie Callahan, should be recorded as Reverend Willie Calhoun. It's on the first line. Public comments were received from Reverend Willie Calhoun. The next one is, hold on, bear with me. It is on the representative from Martin Luther King School. I can't find him now.
Mrs. Cora Charles.
No, Mrs. Cora Charles is, thank you, is from the board of the Martin Luther King Charter School. Reverend Kermit Robertson should be recorded as being from the KIPP School. Is a parent from the KIPP School who also has a child at Martin Luther King, but he was speaking on his own behalf and not as a representative of the King Charter. And Dr. Barbara Ferguson presented on behalf of education reforms.
Okay, I think we have all, is that all?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
All right, thank you. We have those changes. Mr. Romer?
Then I can't remember. We need a motion to approve items. I'll make a motion to approve items 1 through 38, noting that items number 9 and number 38 are notices of intent.
Right. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Dasty. Any comments? Any questions? Any objections? So moved.
Item 9H, State Authorized School Oversight Committee. Mr. Garvey.
Yes, on behalf of the State Authorized School Oversight Committee, I move for approval of items 1 through 10, noting that item 10 is a notice of intent.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Second by Ms. Bouquet. Any objection? Motion approved.
Item 9I, Student School Performance and Support Committee. Mr. Bayard.
Yes, on behalf of Student School Performance and Support Committee, I'd like to move on items 1 through 15 in global, noticing 9, 10, and 11 are NOIs.
Second.
A second by Mr. Lee. Any objections to the motion? Motion approved.
Moving to item 10 on the agenda, there were no advisory council reports this month. Item 11, behind tab 11 in your binder, Board Advisory Council appointments.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any objections? So moved.
Item 12, receive and/or refer items A through L.
I'll make a motion to receive and/or refer items A through L.
Second.
Have a second by Mrs. Johnson. Any objection? Motion approved.
I'd like to ask a question.
Mrs. Gibbons.
Will we have a follow-up on the letter from TRSL concerning the action the board took last month in regard to allowing the KIPP school to remove itself from the teacher risk retirement system. I believe there was an issue of a report coming from the Internal Revenue Service, and I'd like to know when will we receive follow-up information on that item?
That's been referred to the State Authorized School Oversight Committee. I would assume that this would come up at the next agenda, which would be the October meeting. Mr. Bennett?
I think there, Mr. Mongerer with TRSL is awaiting notification. I spoke with him after that meeting, and he's waiting word, and I think he will get back with us.
Okay.
So this item will return to our agenda?
Yes, ma'am.
Following receipt of the information from the Internal Revenue Service?
That's what we're doing now. We're sending it to that committee.
Moving to the emergency agenda, item 13A, receive and/or refer. It's on pages 1 through 2 of your binder, of your packet.
So moved.
Have a motion on this is number 13.
13.
Number 13A. A motion by Mrs. Johnson, seconded by
I'll second.
Mrs. Bouquet. Any objection?
I have a question.
Okay, Mrs. Gibbons.
We are sending this to the State Authorized School Oversight Committee, and it will be placed on the October agenda for discussion?
That's right.
All right. I just want to be clear on what the process is going to be.
Are we ready to vote? Any objections? Motion approved.
Emergency agenda item 14, pages 3 through 28 of your packet, consideration of contracts and leases on emergency basis for the Recovery School District.
So moved.
A motion by Mrs. Johnson, seconded by Mr. Garvey. Any objections? Motion's approved.
That concludes.
All right, that, I think, concludes our meeting. I thank you for, this might be a record.
I think you broke a record, Mr.
1 hour, a
President.
little less than 1 hour.
Less than an
So thank you.
We are grateful.
59 minutes.
Superintendent, tell us what happened here today that you want the people to know about.
Well, today we honored some incredible teachers. We have teachers in science and in mathematics that were honored today. One of them was selected to be a national awardee in science and math and was honored last year at the White House. We recognized 3 nominees from Louisiana, which we hope will be recognized nationally and will also be honored at the White House here not too long. So really good news that people from all around the state were acknowledged as being superior math and science teachers. And in fact, one of the science teachers that we recognized today just won this week an Intel award, Intel Corporation, which acknowledges great science teaching in the classroom. They were given a $10,000 check from Intel. So it just goes to show we have some wonderful teachers who are doing very effective jobs in our schools in Louisiana.
What kind of a message does this send out to the rest of the state and to the nation?
Well, I hope it encourages other teachers to know that they'll be recognized when they do good work, and that we will recognize them, the White House will recognize them, Intel will recognize them. It just sends a really positive message out there.
And you've also received word from Washington on some grants for public schools in the state. Tell us about those.
Yeah, we're very excited that in this day and age where our state revenues are in decline and state budgets are challenged, and it challenges local school districts, that the federal government gave a grant to the state of Louisiana for $147 million to be able to support schools with the pay for teachers. So where schools may be looking at having to lay off teachers this year, there were some school districts that actually had to do this. The federal government has given every district an amount of money proportional to the number of students they have so that they can use that money to avoid layoffs and also avoid layoffs in the year to come. While some school districts are okay this year, next year could be even more challenging. So this money will be very helpful. This money actually is more than 2 times greater than the traditional increase in the minimum foundation program. So, you know, we haven't seen an increase in the MFP, which is the state share of funding for public education, for 2 years. But this amount of money exceeds that by more than a bit, and so we're really excited. With $147 million going to public schools in Louisiana, it really will help.
Final question. You mentioned during your report the reform plan adopted by Bessie, and it had 3 major components. So tell us what those are and what the plans are for implementation.
You know, the State Board of Education adopted